Hilchos Sefer Torah Perek Shvi'i, the laws of Tefillin, Mezuzah, and Sefer Torah, and we're starting chapter 7, which is from now till the end of these set of laws. For the next 4 chapters are going to be focused on specifically the laws around the Sefer Torah. The Rambam begins by telling us the basic mitzvah, which is quite an unusual mitzvah since many people do not do this today personally. Says the Rambam Halacha Aleph Mitzvat Aseh. It is a positive commandment al kol ish va'ish mi Yisrael, on every single man in Israel, lichtov Sefer Torah le'atzmo, to write a Torah scroll for himself. The Rambam writes a double expression, every single man, because he wants to let us know, number one, women are exempt, according to many commentaries, that's how they understand the Rambam, but more so, it's an individual obligation. It's not an obligation upon the community to have a Torah scroll in the ark, in the temple, in the community. No, every single individual has to have his own Torah scroll. Matter of fact, the Chinuch, who was one of the commentators who codified the list of the 613 mitzvahs and also gave explanations for them, he writes, one of the purposes of this mitzvah is so there should be lots of Torah scrolls around in the Jewish people so we could have books to study from. Today we have printed books, we don't really understand this, but in the olden times it was only handwritten scrolls. So the more scrolls were written, the more motivation people had to study. So every single person has a mitzvah to write a Torah scroll. Shene'emar, as it says, ve'ata kitvu lachem et hashira. And the Rebbe says we should add in the next word of the verse, hazot. Moshe Rabbeinu, towards the end of his life, he gave the Jews what's known as the song of Ha'azinu, Shirat Ha'azinu, and afterwards he said, you should write this song for you. V'lamdad b'nei Yisrael sima b'fihem. Teach it to the Jewish people, put it in their mouths. Says the Rambam, Moshe was not just instructing the Jewish people to write down this specific song of Ha'azinu, rather, Kolomar, he meant to say, Kitvu lachem Torah, sheyesh ba shirazu. Write the entire Torah for yourselves, which also contains this song. Lefi she'en kotvin et haTorah, parashiyot, because we may not write the Torah in simple portions. If you're writing the Torah, you have to write it in a whole unit. We're going to see later in this chapter, you have to write at least one full chumash, one full book of the 5 books of the Torah, but certainly not just the portion of Ha'azinu. Therefore, the Rambam learns this verse is a commandment to write the entire Torah. And the Rambam goes on to say, even if your fathers left you a Torah scroll of their own, mitzvah lichtov mishalo, you have a commandment to write your own Torah scroll. If you fulfill this commandment personally, you write it in your own hand. You're literally fulfilling the definition, the purpose of this mitzvah. You're recreating Matan Torah for yourself. You're getting the Torah from Mount Sinai by writing the Torah scroll. But if you don't know how to write the Torah script, which is quite complicated, and as many people today do not know how to do it, you have to have an expert scribe. You should commission somebody else and let somebody else write you the Torah scroll. Anybody who checks a Torah scroll, he doesn't write it, he doesn't commission someone else to write it, he takes an already written Torah scroll and he checks it, even if he just checks one letter and corrects it, it's as though you have written the entire thing, because of course if a Torah has one disqualified letter, the whole thing is worthless. So by you making that letter kosher once again, you've made the entire Torah kosher, and thereby you've created an entire Torah. Now, today, this is super uncommon. Plus, there's another question of what do we do with printed books? Today there's so many printed books. Can you fulfill this mitzvah by buying printed books? So the Rebbe has a wonderful talk where he explains that originally, when the mitzvah was first given, buying a written Torah scroll wouldn't have done you the mitzvah. And that's because the mitzvah took the form of writing a Torah scroll. Since the only way to fulfill the mitzvah of writing a Torah scroll is by writing a Torah scroll, and when you write a Torah scroll, there are so many different laws and complex details that we're going to learn about the next couple of days. So in order for you to fulfill that mitzvah, you have to do it in that prescribed way. But today when we have printed books, and they help us fulfill the ultimate purpose of the mitzvah of knowing the Torah, by buying even the oral Torah, the Talmud or the Mishnah, they help us gain knowledge of the Torah. So in that way, the mitzvah takes on a different form. Since the mitzvah's form is not limited to writing a Torah scroll, not necessarily do we have to write a Torah scroll to fulfill the mitzvah. And it's very possible that we can just buy printed books and in that way fulfill the mitzvah. Nevertheless, even if you could buy printed books, it's only an extension of the mitzvah. The ideal way of fulfilling the mitzvah is certainly to write a Torah scroll. And there's many, many commentaries who deal with the fact that we don't find people even trying to do this. Besides the fact that it's very expensive to write a Torah scroll. But we don't find people trying to write a Torah scroll on their own. And for this, there's many explanations. One of them being that if you buy a letter in a communal Torah scroll, there's an element of you fulfilling the mitzvah in its most ideal form. But certainly, we should buy many Torah books so that way we fulfill at least that element of this mitzvah of getting our own Torah. But in the days when they used to write the Torah scrolls, again, the most ideal way is for you to write it. If you can't write it, commission it, or at least check a Torah scroll and thereby qualify the entire scroll. Says the Rambam halacha bet, v'hamelech, the king of the Jewish people. Mitzvah alav lichtov sefer Torah echad la'atzmo l'shem hamelech. There's a special mitzvah upon him to write another Torah scroll for himself with the express purpose, the intent of it being for the king. Yater al sefer sheyelo kishehu edyot, in addition to the scroll that he has when he is a regular layperson. Shene'emar, as it says, v'hayachish yivto al kisei mamlachto. It's clear in the Torah. It says when the monarch, when the Jewish king will sit on his throne, v'chatav lo v'gomer, he should write for himself at Mishneh Torah azot. That's the next word. He writes himself a copy of the Torah scroll. Umagihinoto misefer azara al pi beidin agadol. This Torah scroll was subject to many special laws. They would have to check it from the Torah scroll that was present in the azara, in the courtyard of the Holy Temple, which we saw a picture of yesterday. And it was done by the instruction of the High Court, because it was the king's Torah, so it had to be extra special, treated with extra respect. Zeh shehaya lo kishehu edyot, the Torah scroll which the king had when he was a layperson, manicho bebet gnazav, he puts it in his treasury, it stays there. V'zeh shekatav o shenichtav lo achar shemalach, but the Torah that he writes, because the ideal way is for you to write it yourself, or the Torah that's written for him, in case he's not a scribe. That additional Torah that was written after he became king, yiyeh imo tamid. The Torah says it should be with him constantly. When he goes out to war, the Torah scrolls with him. Nichnas v'hu imo, when he comes back from the war, Torah is with him. Yoshev badin v'hu imo, if he sits down to judge, Torah is with him. Mesev v'hu kenegdo, even when he leans to have a meal, it should be opposite him. Notice he doesn't say imo, because when you're eating, it shouldn't be with you, but it should be there. He should be facing the Torah scroll. Shene'emar, as it says, v'hayita imo, v'karavo kol yemei chayav. It should be with him, and he should read it all the days of his life. That's the additional mitzvah for the special king's Torah scroll. Says the Rambam halacha gimel lo hayalo sefer Torah kodem sheyimloch. Let's say he didn't have a chance to fulfill his personal mitzvah before he was king. A regular person has to write a Torah scroll. He didn't write it before he became king. Now he becomes king. It's not enough to write one Torah scroll. Tzarich lichtov lo achar shemalach shnei sifrei Torah. He has to write after he becomes king 2 Torah scrolls. Echad manicho bebet gnazav. One he should place in his treasury as the layperson's fulfillment of his obligation. V'hasheni yeh imo tamid. And the second scroll should be for the king, and it should be with him constantly. Lo yasur me'imo, it should never leave him. Ela balayla bilvad, only at night is the one time the king doesn't sleep with the Torah scroll. Ukesheyikanes lebet hamerchatz or lebet hakisei o lishon al mitato, or when he goes to the bathhouse, or when he goes to the bathroom, or when he goes to sleep, even if it's not during the night. If he goes to sleep, you don't sleep with the Torah. Now that we've given the parameters for the mitzvah, in other words, the reason why we're going to talk about a Torah scroll is because we have the mitzvah to write a Torah scroll. Now the Rambam will go into the details of what goes into writing an actual Torah scroll. And he begins with the following. Halacha daled, Sefer Torah shekatvo belo sirtut. If you wrote a Torah scroll without ruling the lines, we've seen this a couple times already during these halachas, that on the Torah scroll or on tefillin or mezuzah, the scribe, before he begins to write, makes lines to rule the lines so they'll be straight, and you have to have it. If you wrote a Torah scroll without ruling it, Osha katvo, or you wrote the Torah mikzato al hagvil, umikzato al haklaf, partially on gvil and partially on klaf, pasul, that's disqualified. What is gvil and klaf? We saw this in the beginning of the laws of tefillin, that when you take the hide off the animal, the full hide is called gvil. But then you can further divide that parchment, that hide, into 2 parts, and one half is called klaf, the other half is called duchsustus. There was some argument, some discussion as to which text was correct, whether klaf is the outer half, duchsustus is the inner half, or klaf is the inner half, duchsustus is the outer half. Bottom line, they're each halves. And the Torah scroll is allowed to be written both on gvil, that's the fully raw hide, or on klaf. But if you wrote them on both, a mixture of both, that's disqualified. Ela o kulo ala gvil, o kulo ala klaf. It has to either be all on gvil or all on klaf. As I mentioned then, today we don't do either gvil or klaf. We take the hide and we don't leave it as it is in its thickness. We shave off on both ends some of the layers, and we're left with just the middle part, which is quite light and quite attractive. So it's the most beautiful way of writing a Torah scroll. And we should have the entire Torah be written from one style of parchment. Meketzad kotvin sefer Torah. How do you write a Torah scroll? Kotev ktiva metukenet na'eh biyoter. You have to write a beautiful calligraphy, very, very nice in its shape. And we saw that it's the Ashuri script, the special script that we have today in Torah scrolls. If you go up to the Torah, you get to see what it looks like. It's a beautiful, special script reserved for the Torah. And the writing should also be attractive. Yaniach ben kol teva v'teva kimlo ot ktana. Between every word, you should leave a space the size of a small letter. Uben ot laot kimlo chut hasa'ara. And between every letter, there should be about a hair's breadth of space. Uben kol shita v'shita kimlo shita. And between every single line, there should be the width of a line. This picture over here on the screen is from a standard Torah scroll. In those days, there wasn't a standard. Today, it's pretty standard that every Torah scroll is the same size and amount of lines and amount of columns. So this is a picture from a standard Torah scroll, actually from this week's Parsha. That's why I chose it, Parshat Matot. And you can see, pretty much between every line, there's almost the size of a full line. That keeps the lines separate, and you can see them, it allows you to pay attention to each line separately. The orech kol shita v'shita, the length of every line in the Torah scroll, shloshim otiyot, should be about 30 letters. Kedei lichtov, in order to write the largest word in the Torah, which is lemishpachotechem, 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 tlata zimnei. To write the word lemishpachotechem 3 times. Lemishpachotechem, as the Rambam spells it here, has 10 letters. Matter of fact, in our Torah scrolls, the way it's written, it only has 9. It doesn't have the vav. But nevertheless, in its fullest form, that's how you would spell it. So he says you should have 30 letters of space, of length in every line. V'zehu rochav kol daf v'daf, and that becomes the width of every column, because if you have a bunch of lines in order, so the length of each line becomes the width of the column, hence the width of every column should be about 30 letters. The lines should not be shorter than that, so that the column doesn't turn into a note. If you write very short lines, and you're going to end up with a whole column that's very thin, and it'll look like just someone wrote some notes, not like a Torah scroll. On the other hand, the length of each line shouldn't be longer than 30 letters, so your eyes are not going to wander in the writing. When you have too wide of a column, you start losing your place. Matter of fact, there's one of the Torah scrolls here in our shul. It's pretty old, and it's the one with the blue covering. And the columns there are actually quite wide. They're not that wide to get lost, but you can start seeing what the Rambam means, that when you have too wide of a column, you can lose your place. And there was never a standard exact length of how long each line, and therefore how wide each column should be. Scribes would write them differently according to their handwriting. But the bottom line is you keep it within 30 letters. How big you choose to make the 30 letters depends on what kind of a scribe you are. That's why many Torah scrolls have varying widths of the column, but all of them share the common denominator in which they're not too narrow and they're not too wide. It says the Rambam halacha hey. Lo yima'et haktav mipnei harevach sheben parasha leparasha. Don't narrow the writing just because of the space between portions. Okay, we're used to knowing portions as the name for the weekly Torah portion. But as a matter of fact, every time there's a space in the Torah, that's called another parsha. Some parshas have space that leaves it open to the end of the line. Some parshas have space where the space is closed in between the lines. As you can see, one example of each type of portion on this page. Now, we're going to see soon that there's a minimum amount of space that open space has to be. It can't just be an inch. It has to be quite a nice amount of space. So what happens if you're a scribe and you see that you're approaching a space, but if you make the letters regular size, you're going to end up with too small of a space. So you'd be inclined to narrow the lettering. Says the Rambam, you shouldn't do that. In order to keep the attractiveness of the Torah scroll, you don't narrow the writing because of the space between portion and portion. Rather, you keep on going, and if you have to make a bigger space, so the space has to go into the next line, as we'll see tomorrow more details about this, then you do that. If you're at the end of a line, and you have a 5-letter word, don't write the minority 2 letters in the column and then 3 letters out of the line. You should do the opposite. Try to write at least the majority of the word within the column and then leave 2 letters hanging outside of the column. Today we have standardized systems of writing a Torah scroll. It's beautiful. The columns always end off nicely in the lines. But in those days when there was no standardized version, so the scribes could end up with these type of cases. If you don't have enough space to write the majority of the word, you'll only be able to write 2 out of the 5 letters, not 3. The Rambam says, leave that space of the 3 letters empty and continue from the next line. Which means that in effect he's also saying, don't take the word before that and elongate the letters. Don't make the letters of the previous word too long just to close the line. You should rather leave it empty and go to the next line. Today, the scribes actually have a custom that if this happens to you, you do elongate the letters because we do want to maintain an equality of width and that it should look all flush. So therefore, we will elongate and narrow as need be in order to maintain the system of the beautiful columns. Halacha vav. Nizdamdan lo teva bat shtei otiyot. Let's say you reach the end of a line, and the next word is a two-letter word. It's very short, et, aleph, taf, or bo, kam, bet, aleph. So you might be inclined to think, you know what, just 2 letters, I'll put it hanging out of the column. Lo yizrekena ben hadapin. Don't throw it between the columns. Go back to the beginning of the line and start from the next line. What happens if you're towards the end of a line and now you have a 10-letter word coming? So before it was a 5-letter word. It's easy to go minority, majority, 3 and 2. Here you have a 10-letter word. Now, as a matter of fact, I mentioned before, there is no 10-letter word in the Torah. The biggest word is 9 letters. There's an 11-letter word in the Megillah of Esther. So maybe this could apply to that as well. But it appears that in the Rambam's tradition, there may have been one of the words that had 10 letters. So if you have a 10-letter word, o pachot o yater, or less or more, 9 or 11, which those do exist, and you don't have enough on the line to write the entire 10, 9, 11-letter word in the column. So over here, because it's such a large word, we don't make you put the majority inside the column. As long as you can fit half. As long as you can fit half of the word in the column and half out, kotev, you write it. V'im lav, if not, again, the Rambam is of the opinion, don't elongate the letters of the words before it. Leave the space open. Maniach hamakom panui umatchil mitchilat hashita. Leave that space empty and go to the next line. You don't have to worry that it's going to look like an open portion, because as we'll see, the space of an open portion is at least 9 letters. So you're never going to have to worry that it's going to look like that. It may look a little bit spacey, but you'll go to the next line and continue the writing. Halacha zayin. There's a special rule. Umaniach ben kol chumash v'chumash arba shitin pnuyot b'lo ktiva. You can see this in the picture here. This is a picture of the end of each of the books. The one on the right is the end of the book of Bereshit. Then it was the end of the book of Shemot, end of Vayikra, end of Bamidbar. The end of Devarim is not here because it just ends on the bottom of the column, bottom of the Torah scroll, so you don't see the law. But between the chumashim, you have to put 4 empty lines without writing. Lo pachot v'lo yater. Not less or not more. Which, by the way, the commentary is right. Therefore, you should never finish the chumash on the bottom of a column exactly, because there has to be 4 lines of space between writing. So you see the book of Bereshit finishes with 1 line on top of the column, and then you have 4 lines of space afterwards. Or this one finishes closer to the bottom, and you have four lines of space. But there's always 4 lines of space between the chumash, v'yatchila chumash mitchilat shita chamishit, and you begin the next chumash, the next book of the 5 books, from the beginning of the 5th line. When you finish the Torah scroll, we have to finish on the very last line of a column in the middle of the line. This is a picture of the last page of the Torah. The last words of the Torah are Le'enei Kol Yisrael. I'm not sure why the lamed is missing of the last word there. I guess it's mistaken in the picture. But the point is, it's finished in the middle of the column. The Taz, one of the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, he says, why? Why the middle? Because if it would finish at the end, the person could be under the impression that it's not the last word of the Torah. Maybe there's more, maybe it continues on the next page. But when you finish it in the middle of the column, that's the end of the paragraph, and there you go, the Torah ends over there. So you must finish it, and therefore you have to calculate your writing that the last portion of the Torah should finish at the end of a column. What if you're a scribe, you're writing a Torah, and boom, you realize that you're in the middle of a column, and you got many, many more lines to go. And you're not going to be able to finish if you write regularly. You're not going to finish it on the bottom of the column. Says the Rambam, mikatzer ve'oleh. You shorten the lines and you keep shortening them. According to the Rambam, it means you start going kind of down like a tail. Make the lines get shorter and shorter. Umatchil mitchilat hashita shebesof hadaf. And you begin doesn't mean begin writing. Begin means you make the shortest point at the beginning of the line at the end of the column. So you make kind of going like an upside down triangle. And so you calculate that at the very last line of the column, that's where it should end. The lo yigmor el tashita, but don't finish that last line. Umitkaven, and you keep on aligning your text. Ad sheyeh le'enei kol Yisrael be'emtza hashita shebesof hadaf, till the words le'enei kol Yisrael, which are the final words of the Torah, come out to be at the very last line in the middle of the line. Others explain mekatzer ve'oleh to mean the opposite. You make a pyramid form where you start wherever you realize that your mistake is happening, wherever you realize that there's too little text left. You start from there, make it a very short line, and kind of come out extensively, and you still finish the last words in the middle of a column. But the Rambam says clearly that you make it shorter going downwards. Halacha chet. Besides for these general rules, there are specific letters in the Torah that have specific shapes, and you must be careful about them. V'yizaher, says the Rambam, you should be careful. Ba'otiyot hagdolot, u'ba'otiyot haktanot, u'ba'otiyot hanekudot. The big letters, the small letters, and the letters that have dots. Just printed out some examples of these. Right here is the very beginning of the Torah, Bereshit bara Elokim. The bet of Bereshit is a big bet. Just another random one you can see over here. This is in Parshat Ki Tisa. Lo tishtachaveh lekel acher. The resh of acher is big. Those are two examples of big letters. And in many other places in Torah, we have to have big letters. There are also some small letters. Like this is the beginning of the book of Vayikra. Vayikra el Moshe. The aleph of Vayikra is a small aleph, mini aleph. Then you have also what's called the letters that have dots on them. Sometimes in the Torah, on top of the words, there'll be little dots. Here's an example from Parshat Vayishlach. When Yaakov met Esav, it says Vayishakehu. Esav ran and kissed Jacob. And there's dots on the word kissed, because it wasn't such a good kiss. Some say he kissed him, he wanted to bite his neck and kill him. Or some say even if he kissed him, it wasn't with a full heart. So the dots kind of minimize the meaning of the word. So you have to know which letters have dots. Ve'otiyot hamishunot. You have to also be careful, says the Rambam, about the strange letters. There are a couple of letters that are written strangely in the Torah. Kegon, hapein halefufot, the wrapped around pays, ve'ha'otiyot ha'akumot, and the crooked letters. Now, today, we don't have these pays in our Torah scrolls, or crooked letters, but there used to be. I'll show you what this is. This is actually a picture of the tefillin. On the right side, you have the tefillin of one of the students of the Baal Shem Tov. And you can see over here, I'm not sure if you can see on the screen there, this pei. Ki yiksha faro, the pei there has a little pei wrapped inside it. That's the pei halefufot. Or here's another example. This is from the portion of Ha'azinu, from a very old Torah scroll. And you see the word parot oyev and v'chiper admato. The pei is kind of wrapped into itself. So you have a small pei inside the big pei. And there's another picture of some tefillin. You have pen yifteh levavchem. You have a pei with a pei wrapped inside it. And then the otiyot ha'akumot, the crooked letters. Here's one example also from a tefillin. You see here, it says v'chara af Hashem bachem. V'chara, the chet, is kind of crooked out. Instead of the chet being two legs straight, they kind of lean outwards. The Arizal writes that the chet in this word should be crooked. Nevertheless, we don't do this in our Torah scrolls. We keep all the chets regular. The one crooked letter that we do have is not really a crooked one, but it's a backwards one. We have a nun, what's called the nun hafucha in Parshat Bahalotcha by Vayhi bin Soah Ha'aron Vayomer Moshe. Just before and after, there's a backwards nun. That is, you'll find that in all standard Torah scrolls. Two nuns, one before, one after, they're backwards. So the point is that there are many strange letters and different ways to write different letters that are super important, and you have to keep those traditions. It says the Rambam, Kemoshe hetiku asofrim ish mipi ish, as the scribes have copied down in tradition one from the other. These were literally orally handed down traditions. V'yizaher bataginu v'minyanan. You also must be careful with the crowns and the number of crowns. We saw in Tefillin and Mezuzah that there are certain letters that have crowns. So you have to be careful with those. Yesh ot sheyesh alea tag echad. Some letters have only one crown on it. V'yesh ot sheyesh alea shiva. And according to the Rambam's position, there are some letters that have 7 crowns. Today in the Torah scroll, we only put crowns on 7 letters. Shat nez gatz, shin ayin tet, nun zayin gimel tzadik. And we only put 3. There are 3 crowns on each one. Other ones, according to tradition, have sometimes on a hay or on a tuf, will have one little thing coming up, one little crown. We don't have any letters that have 7 crowns, but there are some Torahs, and we have pictures of them today, where you can see more than 3 crowns on some letters. But the point is, you have to know. You have to know which letters have crowns. All crowns are in the shape of a little zayin, dakin kechut hasara, literally thin like a hair's breadth, super thin, coming out of the top of the letter. It says that Amam halachatet, you should know, all of these things are only said for the choicest mitzvah. Want the mitzvah to be choice, you follow all these rules and have all these letters and make sure to do all these shapes. But if you changed these adjustments, or you weren't exact with the crowns, but you wrote all the letters properly, you just didn't make the crowns. Or you made lines too close or too far, you made them longer, shorter. Since you didn't stick letter to letter, every letter has full parchment around it. V'lo chiser v'lo hotir, and you didn't make any letters, any words lacking letters, or any words have extra letters. V'lo hifsid tzurat ot achat, and you didn't ruin, you didn't disqualify the picture, the image of even one letter. V'lo shina b'ptuchot ustumot, and you also didn't change the shape of the portions. We saw before, there's open portions, closed portions. You have to know which portions to make which ones. The Rambam will give us a full list tomorrow of these, and you didn't change those. Those are the core rules of the Torah. Everything outside of that, Harei a Sefer kasher. The rest of it is a kosher Torah scroll. It's all there for mitzvah min hamuvchar, for choice mitzvah, but you don't have to necessarily it's not essential to have it. There are other rules when it comes to writing a Torah scroll that are actually not written in the Talmud. Nevertheless, scribes have the custom to do it. It's a tradition in their hands. One man from each other, they all received it from their teachers, who got it from their teachers, and they've been doing this for generations. And they are the following things. The number of lines in every column should be no less than 48 and no more than 60. And also the space between each portion, if there's an opening or a closing area, it should be about 9 letters. Asher, asher, asher. Gives an example: Aleph Shin Reish, Aleph Shin Reish, Aleph Shin Reish. Those are 9 letters in total. Now, when you have the portion of Shirat Hayam, it's on the right side of the screen right now. That's Az Yashir Moshe. It's written in a very specific type of form. We'll see more about that tomorrow. But there has to be some words on top and some words on bottom. And there's a tradition as to which words should be the beginning of those lines. Birosh Hashitin lemala mishirat hayam, at the beginning of the lines, above the Song of the Sea, should be 5 lines with the following words at the beginning: Habaim bayabasha Hashem met b'Mitzrayim. You have those 5. You can see that as they are today in the standard Torah scrolls as well. Chamesh Shitin, 5 lines. Ulemata min hashira, and under the Song of the Sea, there should also be Chamesh Shitin, 5 lines. Tchilat kol shita mehen kach. The beginning of each line should be with the following words: Vatikach, achareha, sus, vayetzu, vayavo. And you can indeed see that we have it here. Those are the 5 letters there, and we see them, the 5 words, and we see them in the beginning of the columns. Also, there's another song in the Torah, and that's the Song of Ha'azinu. On the left side of the screen, you can see it here. Ha'azinu actually goes across 2 columns. So there's a little space, a couple of lines on top of the first column before the song begins, and a couple of lines on the bottom of the second column after the song ends. There's a tradition that those lines should be beginning with certain words. V'yiyeh, says the Rambam, b'rashei hashitin, lemala mishirat ha'azinu. At the beginning of the lines, above the Song of Ha'azinu, should be the following 6 lines. Ve'aida, acharei, haderech, be'acharit, lahach iso, and kahal, shesh shitin, as we do have it in our Torahs as well. Ulemata mimena chamesh shitin, and under it should also be 5 lines, not 6, with also specific beginnings: Vayavo, ledaber, asher, hazot, and asher. And actually today, in standard Torah scrolls, we have 6 lines with a bit of a different beginning. So here we differ a little bit from the Torah of the Rambam. Now, Halacha Yud Aleph, and again he says, all these things as well that were mentioned not in the Talmud but from tradition of the scribes, are also just for the choice mitzvah. If you change them, you didn't disqualify the Torah. Aval in katav hamalei chaser or chaser malei, but if you wrote a word that's supposed to have a full form, like an extra vav or a yud, and you took away the vav or the yud, or you wrote a lacking word full, it shouldn't have a vav, and you added a vav, or shekatav milah shehikri, the katav kikriyata, or you wrote a word that's meant to be read a certain way, but it's meant to be written differently, and you wrote it as it's read. There's many words in the Torah like that, and he gives 2 examples. Kigon shekatav yishkavena bimkom yishgalena, or you wrote uvat chorim bimkom uva'afolim. This is actually, you can see this right here. This is in the portion of Kitavo, in the curses, the long set of curses that the Jews got before they went into Israel, threatening that if they would go against the Torah, they would get these 98 curses. One of the words here, Hashem says, I'm going to plague you, ba'afolim. Now, in the Torah, that's how it's written, but it's meant to be read bat chorim, a totally different word. Also over here, it says you're going to betroth a woman, v'ish acher yish galena, and someone else will consort with her. Now, when we read the Torah, we don't say yish galena, we say yish kavena. He'll lie with her. Nevertheless, in the Torah, you have to write yish galena. So if you wrote these written words as they're read, you wrote yish kavena instead of yish galena, or you wrote bat chorim instead of ba'afolim, the chayotzei bahen or anything like it, or shekatav parsha ptucha stuma, or stuma ptucha, or an open portion. you made it closed, or a closed portion, you made it open, or shekatav hashira kish'ar haktav, or you wrote the song, like we said before, Song of the Sea, Song of Ha'azinu, written in special shapes, and instead you wrote them like regular text, or shekatav parsha achat kishira, or you wrote a regular portion like the song, hareze pasul, then you've disqualified the Torah scroll. The ein bo kedushat sefer Torah klal, it has no holiness at all of a Torah scroll, ela kichumash min hachumashin shemlamdin ba'atinokot, it's simply like a chumash, like a book of the Torah that we teach kids with. It has no holiness. Halacha yud bet sefer Torah she'eino muga, a Torah scroll which isn't checked, it hasn't been edited by a scribe, asur lahashhoto yoter shloshim yom, you literally can't keep it in your possession more than 30 days. People will make mistakes with it. Ela yitaken o yiganez, either you fix it or you bury it. Sefer Torah sheyesh bo shalosh taoyot b'chol daf v'daf, a Torah scroll that has 3 mistakes on every column, yitaken, that's still considered fixable. You can fix it, ima yu arba, but if there's 4 mistakes on every column already, it's done. Yiganez, you have to bury it. By the way, this is one of the things that traditional Judaism talks about when it comes to the Dead Sea Scrolls. People were very up in arms when they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls and they saw different things, different to our tradition. And the Rebbe writes clearly that the reason that they were found hidden in the caves is probably because they were pasul. It's because they were disqualified that they were discovered this way. So you see over here, if you have a Torah scroll that's disqualified, you have to bury it. So it's no shock that it would have differences to our tradition. And in fact, the true tradition is the one that we have passed on from teacher to student, ish mipi ish, man from man. Says the Rambam continues, V'im haya rova sefer muga, if most of the Torah scroll was checked and it was corrected, v'hash'ar yesh bo arba ta'oyot b'chol daf, and the rest of the Torah scroll has 4 mistakes per column, v'nish'ar afilu daf echad me'oto hash'ar ha'mishubash below arba ta'oyot, and even one of the columns of those remaining mistaken columns didn't have 4, hareze yitaken, then it's fixable. Only if every single column has 4 mistakes, then you can't fix it. If it's only a minority and at least one of them has less than 4, you can fix it. Halacha yud gimel b'med dvarim amurim. When are we talking about? What kind of mistakes are we talking about that it's fixable? Shekatav hamalei chaser. It's talking about a case where you wrote a full letter, a full word lacking. So you should have had a vav and you missed the vav. Shenimtza toleha otiyot sheshachach b'nei hashitot. Which means that if you're by adding in the letters to correct the words, you're going to have to be hanging some words out of the columns. It's going to create some unevenness. That's when we say 3 mistakes is fixable, 4 mistakes is no good. But if the issue is that you wrote a word that should have been lacking, you wrote it full, even if there's many mistakes per page, you can fix it. Because all you're doing is scratching off letters. You're not adding any new letters. So those don't count. If you have to scrape off certain letters, that's not considered a bad mistake. You're allowed to write the Torah in 5 separate scrolls, each chumash for itself. Bereshit, Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar Dvarim. However, they won't have the holiness of a Torah scroll. That's only if you have the whole Mishneh Torah. But nevertheless, you're allowed to. But as we said in the first halakha of this chapter, you can't write a scroll on its own that has just a couple of portions. You don't even write it if it's for a child, so you can train with it. Unless, if you have in mind, I'm giving my son just the first couple of portions of Bereshit. When he finishes that, I'm going to write the next couple and I'm going to add it. And in my mind, I'm going to finish the whole chumash, I'm going to finish the whole book of the Torah, then mutar, then it's permitted, because in your mind, you're in the middle of the process of writing one big chumash. Katav Megillah, shalosh tevot b'shita achat. If you wrote a scroll, but it only has 3 lines, 3 words per line, mutar, that's permitted. Now the Rambam himself clarifies what he means over here in a different response. So he writes that he means that it's not just that you're putting 3 letters per line, because then you can still make a beautiful scroll. It means you're making 3 letters per line, and the lines are not spaced evenly. They're a bit disjointed. So there's no possibility to think that this is a proper scroll. It's obviously just for practice. Then it's okay. You could stick together the Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, and the prophets and the writings, all in one scroll. Make a whole Tanakh, a codex, what they call today. When you do so, you should leave between every chumash, as we saw before, 4 lines of empty space. And between every book of the prophets, you leave 3 lines of space. And even between the many prophets, who are all compiled into one book known as Trei Asar, the 12 prophets, Hosea, Yoel, Amos, Yonah, they are very small books, so the sages put them all together in 12. So between those as well, you have to put shalosh shitin, 3 lines. And the reason for this is, she'im balachtoch chotech, so that if you want to cut it up later on, you'll be able to. You left enough space to cut it out and continue each scroll on its own. The Siduran Shal Nevi'im Kachu. So the Rambam, you should know, according to Halacha, the order of the prophets goes as follows. Yehoshua Shoftim, Shmuel Melachim, the book of Joshua, the book of Judges, the book of Samuel, the book of Kings. Then goes Yirmiyah, Yechezkel, Yeshaya, Treyasar, the book of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and then the 12 prophets. According to current tradition, Yeshaya is first. It goes Yeshaya, Yirmiyah, Yechezkel, then Treyasar. The Seder HaKtuvim, and the order of the writings, goes as follows. Ruth, Utihilim, the book of Ruth, the book of Psalms, the Iyov Mishlei, Job and Proverbs, the Kohelet, V'Shir Hashirim, the Kinot, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and Kinot, Lamentations. Today we call this Eicha. The Daniel, Megillah, B'Divrei Hayamim, and Daniel, and the Megillah. Megillah, by default, refers to the Megillah of Esther, the book of Esther, and Chronicles. The Rambam does not mention Ezra and Nehemiah. In some texts, though, it's actually should be there missing. It should be after the word of Megillah. After Esther goes Ezra, Nehemiah, and Divrei Hayamim. Halachat Zayin, Kol Kitvei HaKodesh, En Kotvinotan, Bel Ela B'Sirtu. It's a fascinating law. Till now we're talking about the Torah scroll itself. Torah scroll for sure has to have ruled lines. But every time you write any of the Holy Scripture, you can only write it with ruled lines. Afilu Katvan Al Haniyar. Even if you're writing it on paper. You're just quoting a verse. You're quoting a verse, you have to rule the line. You could write, if you're writing just three words, you can write those without ruling. Yoter al zeh asur. More than that is forbidden. Today we of course print books, no problem, quoting verses. That's because we don't write it in the special script of the Torah scroll. But if we were writing in the script, and we're writing more than 3 words, technically we would have to rule the line first. When you have a full scroll, a codex, that has the entire Bible, the entire Tanakh, Torah, prophets, and the writings, in kedushato ki kedushat Sefer Torah. The holiness does not carry the holiness of a Torah scroll. Ela ki chumash min hachumashim. It's like a regular one of the 5 books. Din hayeter kedin hachaser. The law of extra is like the law of less. Just because you added more doesn't make it more holy. The Torah scroll is simply the Torah scroll of the 5 books. You put less or you put more, they lose their full sanctity, and they have a sanctity of a regular chumash, of a regular book of the Torah.